He walked into the lobby with a mop in his hand and worn-out shoes on his feet, shoes he had crafted decades ago by hand. Now they were cracked, faded, forgotten. Just like his name. The CEO didn't see a man. He saw a uniform, a service worker, someone beneath him. "Get this janitor a real pair of shoes," he mocked, loud enough for the marble walls to echo. What he didn't realize was that he was wearing a mass-produced copy of the very design the janitor had once created with his own hands. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about quiet dignity, about a father who gave up everything for his son and never once asked for credit. A man who waited silently until the moment power failed, until the boardroom panicked and no amount of money or titles could fix what was broken. That's when the janitor stood up. Not for pride, but for purpose. And in doing so, he reminded everyone in that room, you don't need a corner office to change the outcome. Sometimes you just need the right shoes and the patience to let them speak. The wrong words in the wrong lobby to the wrong man in old shoes. This is where it all began. "You call those shoes?" Darren's voice shot through the hotel lobby like a thrown stone, sharp, smug, deliberate. "If my janitor showed up like that, I'd fire him before he mopped the floor." Sam didn't flinch. He paused mid-step, hand resting on the brass railing he'd just polished. His eyes traveled slowly from the marble underfoot to Darren Clive's $1,000 loafers. Then, finally, up to the man's self-satisfied smirk. "Funny thing about shoes," Sam said, his voice quiet, even. "They tell you more about a man than his title ever will." The laughter around Darren stuttered, half-swallowed chuckles from assistants who didn't know whether to join in or look away. Sam turned back to his cart. No fanfare, no drama, just a subtle shift in the air. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Darren blinked, watching Sam disappear around the corner. "Guy's got nerve," he muttered, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. But he didn't know the half of it. Sam Rivera was a janitor at the Corinthian Hotel, a 5-star glass and gold palace that hosted executives, influencers, and luxury brand moguls. His badge said facilities, but his spine said steel. Every morning at 5:45, he arrived before the rest of the world, pushing his cart down polished halls, humming under his breath. Same rhythm, same pair of hand-stitched leather shoes. They weren't flashy, but they were built to last. He'd made them himself, not in a workshop, in a garage, 37 years ago, back when Rivera Footwear was still just a name on napkin sketches and cracked fingers. Back when pride came from doing things right, not doing them first. No one at the Corinthian knew that, not the guests. Not even his son. Especially not Darren Clive, the man who now stood at the top of Rivera Footwear's food chain, holding board meetings in penthouses and making million-dollar mistakes on luxury branding. The company had changed hands years ago. Sam had walked away when they stopped caring about craftsmanship, but his son Eli had joined the new regime, eager to prove himself in a world that cared more about logos than souls. Sam hadn't told Eli the truth, not yet. Let the boy earn his way without a shadow. But days like today made it harder to stay silent. Back in the janitor's closet, Sam untied his shoes with the same care he used when stitching the original prototype. He wiped them down with a soft cloth, his thumb pausing over the faded imprint, RV01, handmade S. Rivera, a name no one cared about anymore. But it still meant something, at least to him. He heard the elevator ping down the hall. Darren's voice echoed again, laughing about a staff dress code. Sam slipped on his work gloves. They mocked what they didn't understand. That was always the way. Where are you watching from? Because this isn't just a story about a janitor in old shoes. It's about the storm that's coming to that marble lobby. And Darren Clive? He just picked the wrong man to humiliate. Sam didn't look back as he pushed his cart down the executive hallway. But he didn't have to. He could feel Darren's gaze trailing him. Disgust, amusement, maybe even confusion. That was always the thing with men like Darren. They couldn't stand being ignored, especially by someone they believed they'd just put in their place. The hum of the elevator doors closing behind him silenced the lobby noise. But Sam's mind wasn't quiet. Not today. Not after that. His fingers clenched the handle of the cart tighter than usual. He didn't let himself react often, but humiliation had a way of working under the skin, quietly, like a splinter. Upstairs on the 34th floor, a very different kind of tension was building. Eli Rivera stood over a sleek white display table in a private design suite, biting the inside of his cheek. The prototype sat in front of him. Sleek lines, premium leather, a layered sole design meant to blend classic feel with modern edge. It was okay, but just okay wouldn't save his job or the department, not after the last two design rounds had flopped with investors. He glanced at the time. Darren would be up in 2 hours to review the final pitch before the shareholder demo, and it still wasn't working. The fit was off. The heel was uneven. Something about the balance was wrong, and Eli couldn't figure out why. He didn't even hear the knock. "Doors open," he muttered without looking up. Sam stepped inside, gloves off, eyes already on the shoe. "How long's it been like this?" he asked soft. Eli jumped a little, turning. "Dad? What are you doing up here? This floor's locked to staff." I know Sam didn't smile. He just walked over and picked up the prototype gently, turning it in his hands. "I shouldn't even be showing you this," Eli said. "We signed NDAs on the—" "You stitched this wrong," Sam said, cutting him off. "Too tight around the flex point." "That's why the heel doesn't hold," Eli blinked. How can you tell that from just holding it?" Sam set the shoe down carefully. "Because I've made a few in my time." Eli gave a short laugh, trying to play it off. "Yeah, back when you were running that cobbler's booth on Main." Sam didn't answer. He just looked at his son. The silence lingered for a second too long. "You're serious," Eli said, his voice lowering. "You made shoes?" Sam nodded once. "A long time ago." "I didn't know you even. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sam glanced at the prototype again. "Because you needed to find your own way." "Not mine." Eli looked down, conflicted. He didn't want to ask for help, not really, but desperation was louder than pride. "If I brought the original sketches and material samples, would you look them over?" "I already did." "Yesterday." While you were out, Eli's jaw dropped. "You what?" Sam pointed to the small detail in the midsole trim. "That stitch right there? That's from a 1988 Rivera line. Only 3 of us ever used it." I recognized it the second I saw it. Eli sat slowly, stunned. Darren said this was a new direction. Sam didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Back downstairs, Darren paced outside the ballroom where the shareholder demo would take place. His assistant buzzed in his earpiece. "Eli hasn't submitted the final prototype update yet." "He better have it cleaned up by the time I walk in," Darren snapped, tapping his watch. "I'm not losing another round of capital because some junior designer can't thread a needle." He passed a service elevator just as the door opened. Sam stepped out with a mop and bucket. Darren didn't acknowledge him this time, but Sam caught the glance, the hesitation. Good. That meant Darren was starting to feel something he didn't understand. In the service hallway, Sam pulled the cart over and reached into the side pouch. He pulled out a folded sketch, creased at the edges, faded but intact. It was a prototype of the RV-01 heel, his original design, the one they were now trying to replicate without even realizing it. He refolded it carefully, slid it back into the pouch, and resumed mopping. Sam didn't need to speak up. Not yet. But Darren's world was built on borrowed brilliance. And borrowed things have a way of falling apart when you don't know how they were made. Eli barely spoke as he walked out of the design suite later that afternoon, the prototype wrapped in a protective sleeve under his arm. His mind was racing, not just with technical adjustments, but with something far more complicated. He kept replaying his father's hands moving over the shoe, steady and practiced, like muscle memory he hadn't known existed. Sam hadn't bragged, hadn't explained. He just knew. And that shook Eli more than the prototype's failure ever could. Across the hall, Darren's assistant flagged him down. "Mr. Clive wants to see you." Now Eli swallowed hard. "Does he have the board in there already?" "No, just him." She lowered her voice. "And he's not in a great mood." That part didn't surprise Eli. He straightened his collar and entered the penthouse conference room. Darren stood at the glass wall, looking out over the city skyline like it owed him something. "You're late." "I needed more time with the prototype," Eli said, stepping in and setting the case on the table. "I've made adjustments." "Did you now?" Darren turned slowly, hands in his pockets. "Because last I heard it didn't hold up in testing. And our investors? They don't give second chances. I understand. But I believe this version will." Darren narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly changed between yesterday and today?" Eli hesitated. This was the moment. 100 answers danced on his tongue. Gut instinct, last-minute inspiration, team input. But none of them felt right. He wasn't good at lying. "I had help," he said finally. Darren raised an eyebrow. "From who? You bring in a contractor without my sign-off?" "No, just someone who knows the original Rivera heel stitch pattern. Someone who's worked with it firsthand." There was a pause. Then Darren laughed, a short, clipped sound with no real humor in it. "You mean your father? The janitor?" Eli tensed. "No, it's fine." Darren waved it off with mock generosity. "If you want career advice from someone who cleans floors, that's your business. Just don't bring his mop into my boardroom." Eli said nothing. His knuckles tightened slightly on the edge of the prototype case. Darren leaned in. "Let me be clear. You're not here because of your dad. You're here in spite of him." Don't forget that Eli opened the case slowly, revealing the revised shoe. "I won't." Back in the service elevator, Sam adjusted the straps of his cart and looked up at the flickering floor indicator. 34, 33, 32. He knew the building better than most who worked above the 10th floor. He'd polished every railing, fixed every squeaky hinge, heard every offhand comment from executives who didn't know their voices carried. He paused the elevator at floor 19, a mostly unused guest level, and stepped off. From his back pocket, he pulled out a small notepad. On it, he had sketched a rough heel diagram in blue ink. Next to it, a few notes. Offset by 2 millimeters. Needs flex adjustment. Replace foam core with cork composite. He tapped the pen once against the page, then tucked it back into his shirt. It wasn't just about shoes anymore. It was about the name. Rivera, his name, his son's name, being twisted into something shallow and lifeless, mass-produced for suits like Darren, who didn't know the first thing about balance, on a shoe or in a business. Down in the locker room, Sam changed shirts and sat for a moment on the bench. Across from him, a younger housekeeper was scrolling on her phone. "You okay, Mr. Sam?" she asked, noticing his far-off look. "Just tired," he said. "You don't seem tired." she replied. You seem like you're waiting. Sam glanced over at her. Maybe I am. She gave him a kind smile. Well, I hope whatever it is comes around soon. Sam nodded but said nothing. Later that evening, he made his way outside. The sky was dimming, and the last wave of executives were filtering into black cars lined up outside the Corinthians' main entrance. He passed Darren again. This time Darren didn't say a word, just gave a sideways glance, then turned to his phone. Sam kept walking, but in that glance, he saw something new. Not recognition, not respect, not yet, but caution. Which meant Darren had started to realize something. There was more to that janitor than he'd accounted for. By morning, the pressure inside the Corinthian hotel was thick enough to taste. Polished tile gleamed underfoot. The air was heavy with cologne and nerves, and Darren Clive was pacing like a man auditioning for war. The shareholder demo was scheduled for noon. Top-tier investors, 2 legacy board members, and a representative from the brand's European licensing partner would all be in the room. The prototype had to land, not impress land. Anything less, and Rivera footwear would be quietly carved off and sold, taking Eli and the last shreds of the Rivera name with it. Darren buttoned his tailored jacket in the mirrored lobby, glancing at his reflection with practiced calm. Where the hell is Eli? He muttered. Upstairs prepping, his assistant said. He says it's ready. It better be, Darren's tone sliced. He gets one shot. I made that very clear. On the 34th floor, Eli stood over the prototype, brushing a soft cloth across the leather one final time. It looked good. More than good. Balanced, sharp, quietly bold. Exactly what the brand needed. But it wasn't just the shoe. It was what the shoe represented now. For the first time, Eli saw what his father had sacrificed. Not just a company, but a craft. A legacy. He hadn't just walked away. He'd buried his name beneath a uniform and kept his hands busy so he wouldn't explode. And now, that name was tied to this pitch, whether Darren knew it or not. Eli picked up the shoe, careful not to smudge the surface. Then, before placing it into the glass demo case, he reached for something from his drawer. The original sketch his father had drawn on the hotel notepad. He folded it small, slipped it under the heel inside the case. Hidden, but there, just like his father. Meanwhile, Sam stood at the far end of the grand ballroom, setting up water stations for the incoming guests. He moved quietly, invisibly, but he saw everything. Where the executives gathered, who looked nervous, who didn't. He also saw something else. Darren, standing with the 2 European partners, speaking quickly, confidently. He gestured toward the stage, the Rivera footwear banner, the glimmering product case beside it. Completely new concept, Darren was saying, designed in-house. We believe it's going to redefine our luxury line. You'll see Sam paused mid-pour. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. That was the final confirmation he needed. Darren wasn't just incompetent, he was claiming ownership of what he barely understood. Just outside the ballroom, the hotel manager, Miss Ortega, stopped Eli in the hall. You look sharp, she said kindly. Thank you. Big day. She tilted her head. You're nervous. First pitch? First one that matters. She smiled. You'd be surprised how often your father used to sketch on napkins during his lunch break. I saved one, I think. I didn't know it meant anything. But now? Eli blinked. You knew? I knew enough. I know pride when I see it. She touched his arm gently. Whatever happens in there, don't let them take that from you. He nodded, throat tight. Thanks, Ms. Ortega. She looked over his shoulder toward the ballroom doors. Looks like it's starting. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with tension. Laptops open, cameras rolling, murmured translations flowing into wireless earpieces. Darren stepped up to the podium like a man preparing to accept an award, not avoid a guillotine. "Good afternoon," he began, flashing a wide, polished grin. "Today, we bring you something bold. Rivera footwear has always meant craftsmanship, but today it means innovation." Sam continued setting water bottles along the back table, unnoticed by all. But his eyes were locked on Eli, who now stood beside the prototype case with his hands clasped behind him. Darren continued, his voice slick with corporate charm. "Our lead designer will now walk you through the technical details of our flagship prototype." Eli stepped forward, heart hammering. "Thank you, Mr. Clive." He turned to the audience. "This design represents not only a shift in structure and balance, but a return to form. True form, rooted in the original design philosophy that built this company in the first place." By hand, a flicker of something passed across Darren's face. Eli nodded toward the shoe. "We've adjusted the flex point, corrected balance in the heel through a cork composite, and restored a stitch pattern used in early Rivera prototypes, something almost no one in production today would recognize." From the back, Sam watched Darren stiffen. He could feel the room shift. Eli hadn't named names, but he'd said enough, respectfully, quietly, just like his father had taught him. Outside in the hallway, Ms. Ortega passed a tray of champagne flutes to the servers. But before she did, she tucked something into her jacket pocket. An old napkin sketch dated 1989. She wasn't ready to show it. Not yet. But when the time came, she'd know where to deliver it. The prototype sat under glass, like a trophy, spotlighted on a black velvet pedestal at the center of the ballroom. Cameras angled toward it. Notepads ready. Even the European delegates leaned in, whispering in rapid French and Dutch. Eli stood off to the side, palms damp, watching every reaction. The numbers didn't matter now. The charts, the research briefs, none of it. This moment would be decided by eyes and instinct and trust. Darren stepped forward, voice smooth as lacquer. "This isn't just a shoe. It's a statement, a merger of design and legacy, revived and reborn for a new era." He opened the glass case. A staff member handed the prototype to one of the board members, who turned it in his hands with the weight of someone evaluating a weapon or a lie. Eli held his breath. Then it happened. The board member tried to flex the heel gently, standard in every evaluation, but instead of bending with bounce and resistance, the heel gave a little too much, then buckled inward with a sickening fold. Snap. Not catastrophic, not broken, but compromised. Enough to kill the pitch. A low, awkward cough from the back. Someone scribbled a note faster. One of the European delegates raised a brow and leaned back in their chair. Darren's eyes went wide for half a second before he masked it. A slight pressure variation, easily fixed in production. The board member looked unimpressed. "This was supposed to be past prototype phase." "It is," Darren said. "We've already scheduled tooling." "You scheduled tooling," the European delegate replied flatly. "On a shoe that collapses under minimal pressure?" Eli stepped forward. "It wasn't doing that yesterday." Darren turned to him like a whip. "You're sure?" Eli hesitated. Yes. I made some adjustments based on..." He stopped himself. "Based on what?" Darren pushed, already looking for a neck to hang it around. "Some intern's guess? Because if this heel can't hold shape at rest, it'll explode on wear test." Silence fell, until one voice broke through, quiet but clear. "It didn't buckle yesterday because it was balanced. Today, it's not heads turned." At the back of the room, Sam stood with a folded chair in one hand and a water bottle in the other, still in uniform, still invisible, until now. Darren sneered. "You don't belong in here." Sam stepped forward anyway. "I don't need to belong." But I do know how to build that heel properly because I designed the first one by hand. In 1987, gasps, confused, murmurs. One of the older board members looked up sharply. Wait, Rivera? Sam nodded. Samuel Rivera, founder, master pattern maker. You're all wearing variations of my original design. Darren scoffed. Impossible. That man retired decades ago. No, one of the board members cut in. He disappeared decades ago, after the buyout. I remember. They tried to force him into licensing garbage. He walked. The delegate, holding the shoe, held it up again. You made this? Sam shook his head. No, he did. He nodded toward Eli. My son. I just corrected the flex pattern after hours, balanced it using cork composite. The delegate turned to Darren. And you didn't disclose this? Darren's mouth opened, closed. He looked to Eli for a lifeline, but none came. Eli stood frozen, pride, shock, and fury crashing together in his chest. Sam walked to the prototype, took it gently from the delegate's hands and flipped it over. He peeled back the heel pad with 2 fingers and pulled out a slip of folded paper. The sketch. The one he'd left beneath it. He held it up. This is how it was supposed to be. The board members leaned forward. The European delegate nodded once. That's a proper reinforcement arc. It's old world exactly, Sam said. And it works. Darren stumbled for words. You're just a janitor now. Sam met his eyes. That's what I do. Not who I am. At the back of the room, Miss Ortega quietly stepped inside. She said nothing. But in her jacket pocket, her hand closed around that napkin sketch she'd saved all those years ago. Just in case. The ballroom was silent. Not the kind of silence you get from boredom or polite uncertainty. No, this was sharper. Tension stretched so tight across the air you could feel it in your throat. Darren stood frozen, one hand still raised mid-gesture, as if his body hadn't caught up to the moment yet. And Sam? Sam stood calm, steady, mop forgotten, sketch in hand. Not smiling, not angry. Just there, finally seen. The board member from the far end of the table leaned forward. Mr. Rivera, if that sketch is yours, and the heel design was yours, why aren't you listed as part of this development team? Sam looked at Eli. Eli, to his credit, didn't flinch. Because he wasn't supposed to be part of it, he said. He helped me when the design failed. Off the record. And who approved that version for final demo? The delegate asked. Eli glanced toward Darren. So did everyone else. Darren straightened his jacket slowly. It passed my desk. And you didn't catch the flaw? The original version didn't have one, Eli said flatly. Until you overrode the heel core change I submitted and insisted on going with foam instead of cork. You wanted it lighter for photo appeal. The French investor leaned back in her chair. So the failure was yours, Mr. Clive? Darren bristled. We're not here to litigate design politics. We're here to talk about market potential. But you can't sell potential if it folds under pressure, the board member snapped. That's the difference between a product and a gimmick. And just like that, the power shifted. It wasn't loud. There were no gasps or slammed fists, but the air in the room changed. Heads turned to Sam with new weight behind their eyes, not as a novelty, not as a moment, but as a man. A man who'd been right. Eli stepped forward, voice steady now. My father walked away from this company when it stopped valuing integrity, when they cared more about flash than fit. I didn't know how much that mattered until this week, but now I do. He turned to the investors. If you want a product line that lasts, it should start here, with his original methods, his patterns, not to glorify the past, but to build something solid, something real. Sam lowered his eyes just for a second. He hadn't expected that. The board member nodded. I'd like to review the complete documentation on this design, including the cork composite approach. Eli responded quickly. It's on file. I'll send it directly. Darren tried again. That's not protocol. We can't just rewrite our sourcing model on a whim. We've already invested in foam partners overseas. And foam just collapsed in front of half our stakeholders, the European rep snapped. We'll retool. Sam stepped back, returning the sketch to Eli. It's yours now, he said quietly. Fix it. Back near the ballroom doors, a group of junior designers stood frozen. One of them, a wiry guy with thick glasses, whispered to the woman beside him, Wait, was that the Rivera? Like, the Rivera? She nodded slowly. I think so. He was cleaning bathrooms last week. Yeah, but today? He cleaned up a boardroom downstairs. Sam returned to the locker room. The fluorescent light above his bench flickered like always. He sat down slowly and untied his shoes, same pair he wore every day. As he pulled one off, he reached inside and pulled out a small object tucked behind the tongue, a brass eyelet tool, worn from years of use. His last one. He held it in his palm and closed his fingers around it. Not everything had to be loud, to be powerful. Darren, meanwhile, stormed into his corner suite and yanked off his blazer. His assistant followed cautiously. They bought into him, he muttered, pacing like a man drowning in his own reflection. A janitor? No, she said quietly. They bought into the man who actually built something. He stopped pacing. That stung more than he expected. Later that night, Eli found Sam in the hotel's rear garden, the one staff used for breaks when the world got too loud. Sam sat on a wooden bench, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the skyline. You never told me, Eli said, sitting beside him. Would it have changed anything? Eli thought for a moment. Yeah, it would have made me try harder. Sooner, Sam nodded. That's why I didn't. They sat in silence a while longer. Then Eli asked, You think they'll listen? The board? They already did, Sam replied. By the next morning, the story had started to spread. Not as headlines, not as press releases, but as whispers, side glances, quiet retellings behind coffee cups and Slack channels. A designer no one paid attention to had saved a sinking prototype. A janitor had stepped into the boardroom and corrected the CEO in front of the European delegation, and been right. Within hours, it had taken on a rhythm of its own. Did you hear what happened in the ballroom? They said he used to own the company. He designed the heel? No way, Rivera, as in Rivera Footwear. By lunchtime, 3 different employees from 3 different departments had sent screenshots to one another of the name Samuel Rivera appearing in the company's legacy archive records. And by 2:15 p.m., the CTO's assistant walked into his office holding a small folder labeled simply Rivera Samuel, founder record. Darren Clive heard the knock before he saw the damage. Come in, he snapped. The assistant stepped in with the folder. They're asking for clarification. Who is? Legal, and 2 investor liaisons. They want to know why Rivera's original designs weren't properly credited in the prototype file. Darren's jaw tightened. Because he hasn't been on payroll in over 20 years. They still want a statement. One of the shareholders forwarded a video. Video? Someone filmed the heel collapse. And Mr. Rivera's correction. Darren didn't speak for a long time. Then, tell them we'll review internal attributions. No comment until then. The assistant hesitated. Also, HR flagged your press talking points for tomorrow's showcase. They'd like you to avoid the phrase internally developed from scratch. He didn't respond, just waved her out. Back in the design lab, Eli sat at his workstation, refining the updated prototype specs. For the first time in weeks, the lines felt right, clean, stable, true. Across from him, Leo, the wiry designer who'd whispered during the pitch, hovered awkwardly. "Hey," Leo finally said. Look, I just wanted to say that was impressive." Eli glanced up. "Thanks." "No, I mean seriously. I had no idea your dad was that Rivera. Neither did most people. Some of us are thinking of pitching the board about reintroducing one of the old lines. Like a retro classic revival. Based on your dad's original designs." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah. You've got sketches, right?" "I've got more than sketches," Eli said. "I've got his workshop blueprints." He saved everything. Leo grinned. "Well, maybe it's time the rest of us started learning." On the 10th floor, Sam was pushing his cart past the reception lounge when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned. A young woman in a charcoal pantsuit was standing there, fidgeting with her phone. "I just wanted to say thank you. I was at the demo yesterday. I've never seen anything like that." Sam offered a small nod. "I didn't do much. That's not how it looked from where I sat." She hesitated, then added, "I called my dad last night. Told him I've been chasing titles instead of craft. He's a carpenter. I haven't visited his shop in months." "Your story?" Reminded me. Sam's throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. "He'll be glad to see you." "I think so too," she said, then walked off. In the hotel break room, Ms. Ortega leaned against the counter, watching the staff circulate during afternoon lull. She held the old napkin sketch in her hands, folded and unfolded it over and over. Finally, she slipped it into a clean envelope and wrote on the front in neat, steady print, "To be returned to the man who never stopped building." She handed it to the receptionist with instructions. "Make sure Mr. Rivera gets this." "No rush. He'll know what it means." Later that evening, Sam sat at his kitchen table, same chair he'd used for 20 years, same clock ticking faintly in the background. Eli sat across from him, tapping his fingers against a folded piece of cardstock, an invitation to the upcoming corporate product showcase. "They want us both to attend," Eli said. "You as a guest of honor." Sam didn't respond right away. "You don't have to speak," Eli added quickly. "They just want to acknowledge—" "I'll go," Sam said, voice low. Eli blinked. "You will?" "I'm not going back for applause. I'm going back to make sure they get it right this time." Eli nodded slowly. "That's fair." Sam stood, walked over to the cupboard, and pulled down a small tin box. Inside were 7 prototype nameplates, each one engraved with R001 through R007. He ran his thumb over them, then set the first on the table between them. "Time you started adding your own numbers." Eli smiled, and something in his shoulders loosened, like the weight of 2 decades had finally shifted. The showroom was unlike anything Sam Rivera had seen in years. Glass, chrome, LED walls humming softly behind sleek white pedestals. Marketing banners curled toward the ceiling like sails, each bearing sharp new slogans: "Heritage Reborn, Crafted to Endure," and, in bolder font beneath the Rivera logo, "The Original Returns." Eli stood near the stage, triple-checking a small digital presentation clicker in his hand. His shirt collar was crisp, his jacket tailored but modest. He looked the part, sure, but his eyes kept darting toward the entrance. "I still don't know if this is a good idea," Eli muttered. "It's not—" "About good," Sam said behind him, suddenly appearing by his side in a clean black button-down. "It's about right." Eli turned. "You came." "I said I would." Sam's voice was calm, but his presence said more. The hush that fell over the nearby staff confirmed it. The man they'd once ignored now drew quiet nods, longer stares, reverence. One junior designer actually whispered, "That's him," to her colleague. She didn't even need to say the name. Across the showroom, Darren Clive leaned against a podium, sipping something amber from a cut glass tumbler. He saw them. Of course he did. And he smiled. But it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a man waiting to reclaim the room by pretending he never lost it. An assistant approached him nervously. "Should we adjust your speech?" "No," Darren said. "Stick to the plan." "Even with Rivera in attendance?" "He's not on the board. He's not an employee. He's a footnote. Keep it tight and move on." But Darren knew something was shifting. He could feel it in the eyes of the investors, in the shifting tone of internal emails he wasn't supposed to see, in how people responded to him now, with politeness instead of instinctual deference, like they were calculating. That terrified him more than Sam ever could. Eli guided his father backstage while crews finalized the lighting and mic checks. "You don't have to say anything," he reminded again. "You just need to be seen." "I've been seen enough lately," Sam said, then cracked the faintest smile. "But I won't vanish again. Not while your name's still on this." Eli swallowed hard and nodded. The prototype sat nearby on a pedestal. It looked stronger now, refined but true. The adjustments Sam had guided Eli through had held perfectly. Even the old Rivera heel badge had been discreetly added back into the arch, embossed instead of stitched. Not everyone would notice, but the right people would. At precisely 6 p.m., the lights dimmed. Music swelled, subtle, orchestral, meant to inspire gravity. Darren took the stage with practiced charisma. "Good evening and welcome. Tonight we don't just launch a product. We recognize a legacy, one built with care, precision, and an eye toward the future." He gestured toward the Rivera prototype. "What you see here represents a return to fundamentals, a respect for craft. Our team, led by our exceptional designer Eli Rivera, has restored the very spirit that once defined this brand." Applause. Eli nodded from the side of the stage, tight-lipped. Darren continued. "And in that spirit, we'd like to welcome someone who helped build the first Rivera line decades ago. Please join me in acknowledging Mr. Samuel Rivera." Cameras flashed. Applause lifted. Sam stepped onto the stage, slow but sure. The lights caught him in full for the first time. Worn features, still hands, eyes that had seen boardrooms, workshops, and mop closets. Without losing clarity, Darren offered a handshake. Sam didn't take it. Instead, he stepped to the microphone. "Thank you," Sam said, his voice quiet but resonant. "I never expected to be back in a room like this. I spent years building something I believed in. Then I spent years watching it disappear, silence, no movement. My name was taken off the door. My designs were scrubbed from memory. I became what they call non-essential." A few guests shifted in their seats. But something strange happens when you sweep floors long enough. You hear things. You learn who still cares and who doesn't. And sometimes, you get a second chance to protect what matters. He turned toward Eli. "This design? It's not mine anymore. It's his. But what's in it? That balance, that patience, that fight to get it right? That's what I left behind. And now, it's back." The applause that followed wasn't loud at first, but it built. It rolled. And Darren? He smiled, nodded like it was all part of his plan, then slowly stepped back from the spotlight he no longer owned. Backstage, Ms. Ortega slipped through the curtain and handed Sam an envelope. He opened it. Inside, the napkin sketch she'd saved all those years ago, sealed now in a museum-grade sleeve. On the back, she'd written, "Some names never fade. They just wait to be heard again." The next morning, the buzz hadn't died down. If anything, it had only grown sharper. Clips of Sam's speech were already circulating on social media. Quiet, powerful moments of truth, layered over captions like, The janitor who built the company, and not all legacies wear suits. Designers from smaller footwear brands started posting tributes using the hashtag #Rivera Returns, and the company's internal employee portal lit up with messages of support for the new direction. Sam didn't check any of it. He showed up at the Corinthian like he always did. 6 a.m., toolbox in one hand, shoes tied tight. He clocked in. He mopped the east wing marble. He repaired a loose railing by the elevator. He wiped down the brass nameplates that bore other men's names, knowing full well his had rung louder the night before than all of them combined. He didn't need the noise. He had rhythm, and rhythm had kept him going long before applause had any use. Eli, on the other hand, couldn't ignore the ripple. He walked into the design floor and felt the shift instantly. Heads turned, voices lowered. But this time, the silence didn't feel cold. It felt like recognition. Colleagues offered brief nods. A few clapped him on the shoulder in passing. Even Leo, who had never once asked him for input before, appeared at his desk with 2 coffee cups and a sketch pad. "Thought you might want to take a look," he said, eyes hopeful. Eli sipped the coffee, flipped open the pad, and smiled. "Let's work on it together." He was no longer someone fighting to prove himself. He was the proof. Upstairs, in a corner conference room, the board convened behind frosted glass. Darren stood at the head of the table, hands resting too tightly on the surface. "The event went well," he said, voice clipped. "Brand sentiment is trending positive. Retailer inquiries up 12%. One of the board members flipped a page in the packet. "And where does that leave you, Mr. Clive?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" The chairman leaned forward. "Let's speak plainly. It wasn't your name trending after the launch. It was Rivera's with respect," Darren said carefully. "Samuel Rivera is a retired artisan. He's not part of the executive structure. He was never removed from the brand DNA," the French delegate replied. "You just didn't bother looking for it." "We'd like to explore a transitional leadership structure," another added. "Someone to bridge the new vision with the original values." Darren stiffened. "You're suggesting I step down?" The room was quiet for a beat too long. "We're suggesting you let someone else lead the next phase," the chairman said. "Your presence will remain advisory." Advisory. The word hung in the air like a demotion dressed in silk. That afternoon, Sam was fixing a stubborn soap dispenser in the men's lounge when Ms. Ortega appeared at the door. "You've got a visitor," she said gently. "I'm working," he replied without turning. "I think you'll want to take this one." Sam sighed, wiped his hands, and followed her down the hall. In the hotel library, a woman in a linen blazer stood holding a sleek black case. "Mr. Rivera?" she said. He nodded slowly. "My name's Nadine Grant. I represent the American Craftsmanship Archive. We document legacy artisans across industries, names people forget, until they realize they shouldn't have. I'm not much for museums." "This isn't about museums," she said. "It's about story. We want to record yours, your original designs, your philosophy, your hands." Sam looked at the case. "And if I say no?" "We'll still write it," she smiled, "but it won't be the same without your voice." He considered it, then slowly reached out to open the case. Inside, resting on velvet, was a fresh Rivera prototype, his son's updated version, flanked by a brass plaque engraved simply, R008, The Legacy Continues. Sam stared at it, chest tight, not with pride, with peace. Eli found him later in the garden, seated on the bench, hands folded over his lap. "They're talking about using your name in the official relaunch," Eli said. "Full branding." Sam raised an eyebrow. "They want my name back now?" "They want what it means." Sam nodded. "Then make sure they earn it." Every time Eli sat beside him, holding a copy of the prototype in his own lap. "There's one more thing," he said. They offered me creative lead on the next. Line Sam turned slowly. And? I said yes, on one condition, which is that we build it together. Sam didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached over and patted the shoe lightly. One condition, he replied. We don't rush the stitching. Eli smiled. Deal. The Rivera relaunch event was scheduled for Friday, but by Monday morning, it already felt inevitable. The branding team had rolled out teasers across every digital billboard from Los Angeles to Tokyo. Black and white close-ups of thick stitch patterns, textured leather overlays, and one simple line beneath the Rivera crest, "Craft is never forgotten." It just waits. It wasn't Sam's words, but it might as well have been. Sam arrived at the hotel just before dawn, like always. Same shoes, same stride. But this morning, Ms. Ortega met him at the staff entrance. Not with a clipboard or an equipment request, but with a garment bag and a handwritten note. She smiled softly. Today you don't mop floors. Today you walk across one. Sam arched a brow. What's this? Your seat's in the front row. He hesitated. Is it optional? She chuckled. No, Mr. Rivera. Not anymore inside the ballroom. Preparations were well underway. Chairs being aligned, lights tested, camera mounts checked twice. On stage, Eli stood directing a few interns on how to properly mount the new Rivera prototype on the turntable. His movements were confident now, less anxious, more rooted. The shoe itself was perfect, a tribute and a departure. It bore the signature Rivera heel structure, but with a new twist, Eli's own sole design, shaped to reflect a forward tilt. Craft anchored in legacy, designed for motion. As Eli turned to check the stage alignment, he saw his father step through the rear entrance of the room, shoulders squared, black dress shirt pressed. Their eyes met. No words were needed, just a nod. The kind that said, "We made it through." Meanwhile, in a high-rise office across town, Darren Clive sat watching the event feed on his tablet. His name wouldn't be called today. No speeches. No spotlight. But the sting wasn't as sharp as it had been last week. It was something else now, like relief disguised as disappointment. He looked at the RSVP list on his desk, then closed the tablet and leaned back in his chair. Sometimes the legacy wins, and sometimes that's not a loss. Back at the Corinthian, guests began arriving in waves. Industry leaders, fashion journalists, former Rivera clients, even a few skeptical execs from rival brands. But as they took their seats and reviewed their press packets, one name was on every page. Samuel Rivera, founder, craftsman, legacy maker. The lights dimmed. The Rivera theme played low and slow. Eli stepped on stage, holding the mic loosely, like a tool rather than a weapon. "I was raised around tools," he began. "My father never talked much about titles or legacy. He talked about tension, balance, pressure. Where a stitch should breathe and where it should hold." He nodded toward the rotating prototype. "This isn't just a shoe. It's a lesson." One passed quietly. From hand to hand, he turned toward the front row. "To the man who built with his hands while the world stopped listening. This line is yours." A single spotlight cut from the stage to Sam Rivera. He didn't smile, but he stood up. And that was louder than any grin could ever be. After the applause, Sam was ushered to a private side room where 3 members of the brand's leadership team stood waiting. They weren't here for show. They were here for his signature. A formal agreement sat on the table, naming him Honorary Master of Design Heritage, giving him permanent archival credit, consultation rights, and a revenue stake in all future models based on Rivera originals. Sam scanned the paper once, twice, then set the pen down. "I don't want the title," he said. The woman leading the meeting blinked. "Sir, it's ceremonial. I want the workshop." There was a pause. The original one, Sam clarified. The space they gutted. I want it reopened. Not for me, for the next one's coming. The kids who think hands don't matter anymore. He looked up. Gimme that, and I'll sign. The room fell silent. Then the lead exec slowly nodded. You'll have it. Outside, a journalist caught Eli between interviews. Is this your father's redemption story? She asked. Eli shook his head. No, he never lost anything. We're just finally catching up. Later that evening, long after the showroom had emptied, Sam walked alone through the quiet corridors of the hotel, past the same elevators, same polished floors. He paused at the janitor's closet. The door was ajar. Inside, his cart was still there, waiting, as if unsure what to do without him. He stepped in, reached for a rag, then stopped. Instead, he took the name tag off the peg. Samuel, Facilities. He held it a moment, then tucked it into his pocket. He wasn't ashamed of it, but it wasn't where his hands were needed anymore. The old Rivera workshop was nothing like Sam remembered. The building hadn't been touched in years, at least not with intention. Dust coated the floor in thin layers. Broken bolts lay scattered near the back wall, where the tool racks used to hang. The skylight, once his favorite feature, had been covered over with a tarp that flapped softly in the breeze, like a forgotten curtain. Sam stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Every creak of the floorboard was a memory. Every scent, leather, glue, old cork, was a ghost that hadn't fully left. But he wasn't here to mourn. He was here to rebuild. Back at the Corinthian, Eli stood in the employee lounge, facing 2 HR reps and a design team supervisor. All 3 had clipboards. All 3 looked uncomfortable. We've been asked to present you with 2 options, one of them said carefully. A full-time executive design director role at Rivera, reporting to the board. And the other? Eli asked. Lead of a new mentorship program, focused on craft design, legacy training, and hands-on production work, co-led by your father, if he's willing. Eli smiled. Then it's not really 2 options, is it? They exchanged glances. I'll take the second one, he said, but with a caveat, which is, I want it named after him. The Rivera method? Put it on the wall, on the letterhead, and in the application forms. The reps nodded slowly. We can make that happen. By the end of the week, the Rivera workshop had been cleared of debris. Light filtered through the repaired skylight. The original sewing station had been reinstalled, and the new tools, carefully selected by Sam himself, were lined up along the east wall. Sam stood with Eli, watching a group of 6 new trainees shuffle inside, unsure of what exactly they were stepping into. They were young, some barely out of high school. Most came from trade backgrounds. None had ever held a hand-stitch awl before. But they were curious, and that was enough. One girl walked over to the table and ran a finger across the leather patch sitting there. You made this? She asked. Sam shook his head. Not yet. But you will. Meanwhile, Darren Clive officially stepped down from his advisory role. The announcement was brief, 2 paragraphs at the end of a shareholder memo. There were no headlines, no send-off interviews, but in the lobby of Rivera headquarters, the newest rotating display case featured something that hadn't been seen in decades, the original RV-01 prototype, handmade, worn, still intact. Below it, a card, crafted by Samuel Rivera, walked by thousands, never broken. That night, Sam sat on the bench outside the workshop, wiping dust from his hands with a cloth older than most of his students. The city buzzed softly in the distance, but this street was quiet, almost sacred now. Eli joined him a few minutes later with 2 cups of coffee. They're already talking about next year's launch, Eli said. New models, international lines. Sam took the cup. Let them talk. Eli glanced sideways. You ever think we'd end up here? Sam didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, scarred, steady, unshaken. "No," he said softly. "I thought I'd die behind a mop bucket, and they'd never know what they threw away." Eli's jaw tensed. "But I was wrong," Sam added, "because you knew." Ms. Ortega arrived just as the lights in the workshop shut off for the evening. She handed Sam a small envelope. "No name on it," she said, "but it came through our front desk today." He opened it slowly. Inside was a business card. Darren Clive Private Consulting, Brand Identity Rebuilding. On the back, in ink, "I still don't understand how you stayed quiet that long, but I'm learning." Sam tucked it into his jacket. Then he stood. "You ready?" Eli asked. Sam nodded, and together, father and son walked down the street. No logos, no fanfare, no cameras, just quiet steps between two men who had walked through fire and found something worth leaving behind. A year passed, not loudly, not with headlines or galas, but with stitches, sawdust, shared coffee, and quiet purpose. The Rivera workshop now hummed daily with the rhythm of tools meeting material, of students learning to trust their hands, of craft returning to a world that had forgotten what it felt like to slow down. The name Rivera was no longer just a label on a shoe. It was a method, a mindset. And Sam? Sam no longer wore a name badge. He wore respect. In the corner of the workshop, a plaque had been mounted on the wall. It wasn't flashy, just brushed steel, small and simple. The Rivera Method, for those who build with silence. Below it, a row of hooks held student-made prototypes. Each one bore a single brass tag with its maker's initials. No flashy logos, no overstated credits, just lineage passed from hand to hand. Eli stood at the workbench, guiding a new student through heel shaping. "Feel the bend before the tool touches it," he said. "You're not forcing the shoe. You're finding it." Sam watched from a few feet away. He didn't interrupt, just leaned against the door frame with a quiet smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Eli was better than he had been, faster, more instinctive. That was the point. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about what you leave behind that remembers you. At Rivera headquarters, the spring catalog launch featured a spread titled "The Hands Behind the Craft." Instead of celebrity models, it highlighted the students of the Rivera workshop, each holding their own design, each photographed in the space where it was created. No filters, no lights, just honest faces and raw work. And on the final page, in black ink on white, "Founded by a janitor. Restored by his son. Continued by all of us." That night, Eli and Sam sat on the rooftop of the workshop, city lights blinking beneath them, the world quieting around them. Eli held a small notebook in his lap, his father's original sketchbook, leather-worn, and filled with years of drafts, corrections, and unspoken thoughts. "I think it's time we digitize these," Eli said. "Get them archived." Sam shook his head. "Let them stay messy." Eli laughed. "You always were stubborn." "And you," Sam said, sipping his tea, "are finally steady." They sat in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Then Sam reached into his jacket and handed Eli a box. "What's this?" Eli asked. "Your turn," Sam said. "Open it." Inside was a brass prototype tag engraved R009, E. Rivera. Eli's breath caught. "You made this for me?" "No," Sam said. "You made it." "I just kept it safe back at the Corinthian." Ms. Ortega sat in the break room, sipping her evening tea. On the counter beside her was a copy of the Rivera catalog. She flipped it open, smiled at Sam's photo, and whispered, "Told you they'd remember?" Then she turned off the light and walked out. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. CEO mocked the janitor's broken watch. It was the only prototype missing from his own company. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?